guys, I'm Tiffany. Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in August. So I'm going to be doing what I did last month in July. So I'm going to be talking about books that I DNF'd, books that I didn't complete but I still plan to read later on, and the books that I actually read. So the book I DNF'd was Bad Girls with Perfect Faces. Now I got about 4% into the book, but it just was not working for me at all. This was the book that I had planned for the Trope-ical Readathon to read for multiple POV. It just was not working for me at all. I mean, the synopsis itself, it wasn't very descriptive. It didn't tell you anything about what the book was about, what it was doing. I was very much going in blind to the book, and I never go in blind. So it was like, hey, let's give this a try. It's a pretty short story. It's only 6 hours on the audiobook. So I was like, this can't hurt, but it just was not working for me at all. I was just getting very bored. So I set it aside, and I'm just not going to go back to it. That was just a book that 100% did not work for me. Next up are the books that I attempted but didn't complete, but again, I'm still going to go back to them later on. So I was reading The Library of Lost Things. So this was for the Trope-ical Readathon prompt, Bookish Themes. Now I got about 7% into that book. This is my second attempt to reading this book. I don't know. I mean, I'm really not interested in the fact that the main character's mom, she's a hoarder and everything. It doesn't appeal to me. I really don't care. I really don't want to read about that. I mean, 7% I know isn't that much, but the fact that it's supposed to be a contemporary romance and I still haven't met the love interest or anything, and really the only thing that's happening is her talking about her hoarder mom. And I just don't want to read about that. It's just not working for me. Next up, I tried Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It's not so much about duration because this is a 3-hour book on audiobook, so it's that's not going to be something that hurts. But it just was not working for me at the time. I still plan on reading it, probably. I only got a couple minutes into it. It just wasn't working for me. But again, like I said, I'll probably try it out a different time, but at this point, I'm just not. And the last book that I attempted was Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So this is a reread. I just thought it would be fun, just get something very quick out of the way, because I looked it up and I saw the audiobook is only an hour something. So I was like, hey, that's pretty easy. We could just do that. But I was going through the actual book itself, the ebook of it. And yeah, Greg, I love those movies, and I remember reading these books. It's a good time, whatever. But right now, it just wasn't working for me, and oh my gosh, he was being such a nice guy when he was like, oh, well, the girls are all into this one guy, but I've always been nice to girls. I've always stood up for girls. I'm like, oh my gosh, Greg Heffley is a typical nice guy, and I'm like, I don't want to read about that. So I had to set it aside. Maybe I'll get back to it, but at this point I was just like, this isn't working for me. Now I'm gonna get into the books I actually read. So the first book was 17th Summer. So this was a young adult contemporary romance read, and apparently this was first published way back in 1942. And it was one of the first books that was classified, marketed as young adult, which is pretty crazy. So obviously with a book like that, it's not quite rating something presently, because things are so different now and things were so different back then. It was definitely interesting though. I thought the writing, so I read this through audiobook, and I thought the narrator did a pretty good job. But so many times I got tricked into thinking this was now, current. But then there were things they would talk about, certain standards or etiquette, things like that. And some of the grammar was very different to today. So there were times where it was oh, this is obviously from a different time. This is an older book. So it was a very interesting read. And I feel very much like this is a look into the past of what someone who was a teenager at the time would be thinking and everything. I mean, Some of the things I definitely think do not fit to today's standards or anything, but it was definitely interesting. I won't spoil the ending, but I did appreciate what happened at the ending, because there was something they started with where I was like, no, 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 maybe in 1942 that was okay, but we're not doing it in today. And I'm so glad that the author didn't go that route, so I'm glad about that. So it's kind of hard for me to say if I like or don't like it. Like, I feel like it was very interesting to read. Like, if this was a book I read in school, I'd probably be like, wow, this was much better than I expected, because I usually don't like school books. But it's still not interesting, or it's not like I really learned with these books, but I just feel like it didn't really have entertainment value. It felt more like just kind of looking into the past, which was very interesting, because I really don't know about the 40s or anything, and I had never really heard of teenagers of that time talking about their experiences. So it's very interesting. You know, it's kind of like a time capsule. So I did appreciate that aspect. I don't know about interest in like the book itself, because it was so much, it's hard to say. I think a strong point of the book is the fact, because I've been requesting this, I'm like, okay, every time there's a romance, it's like this build-up, but you don't actually get to see them together. You know, it's all the angst and everything, and it's like, do you like me? Do I like you? Blah, blah, blah. But what's nice about this book was it was kind of like almost right away they kind of get into this courting, dating situation, and you actually get to see their relationship grow. Now again, it is still very different from what a book of today would do, because there would be just more things for the girl to do, you know? And a lot of the time I do think the guy, the love interest, he just wasn't working for me. And I don't think he works by today's standards, because like he really doesn't talk to her a lot of the time. It's kind of more like group dates where she's not really involved, she's not really talking or anything. It's very much not of our time, but again, I do think it was an interesting read to look at the time of the 1940s. Like, I do think it was interesting in that aspect. And again, it was nice that there was a book that actually showed a relationship. You know, like, you could actually see the real relationship, not a fake relationship, not all the build-up to finally do a relationship and a kiss at the end. Like, there was actually something to it. Also, I was surprised about this. Now again, I don't really know that much about the 1940s, but I thought it was pretty conservative at the time. I was so surprised. There were a good couple of sexual jokes in this book. I was so surprised. I was like, really? But again, I don't know enough about the time. Maybe this is what teenagers did at that point, but I thought even in media, like a book, you know, maybe they wouldn't want to do that. But I guess because it's like a sexual innuendo instead of an actual sex scene or something, maybe they have different standards or something. It was definitely interesting to read a book all the way back then. The next book I read was That Holiday in France. So this was the prompt: read a book set in a different country, or it's a holiday-centered book. And obviously, I get both with this one. That Holiday in France. So that works. When I read it, I mean, I was kind of feeling neutral about it. Like, probably neutral to didn't like it, but I was okay reading it, you know? But looking back on it, maybe this was the worst out of the bunch of the books I read this month. Yeah, it just didn't work. You certainly got certain things, like the fact that the main character, she was in an abusive relationship and her dad was an enabler and he had some backwards views and everything. I think the fact that her conflict, the thing that she had to work through, being ignorant and everything, and kind of having the opinions that her dad does, it didn't really work for me. The fact that she's that old and she still has the same views as he does, it's like, come on, you know? But I don't know, this book, yeah, I just don't think it was my kind of book. I mean, I was okay with it when I was reading it, but yeah, that's it. I know I'm not really saying that much, but it really was a book that's just kind of like, you read it, okay, and you're kind of done. And the last book I read was Beezus and Ramona. So this was for the Trope-ical Readathon prompt mixed media or read an audiobook or ebook. So I read this through audiobook. The reason I picked this up, I just kind of wanted to get a quick book out of the way. And it was nearing the end of August, so I was like, okay, let's just do this. And the audiobook was only a little under 2.5 hours. So I was like, hey, I can deal with this. I feel like there wasn't too much with the story. Now again, it is a little kid's book, but you know, again, it was a little like, that's it. You know, there were some hijinks. Ramona was being a total nuisance to Beezus and her family. And oh my gosh, if you are someone who wants to read this or read it to your kids, do it yourself or just have them read the actual book. Do not try the audiobook. It was so awful. The narrator, she just nasaled their actual words and she could talk normally. Like, you know, when she would just narrate the actions and everything, talking about what they were actually doing, being the narrator. But when she would do dialogue, oh, it was awful. It was so annoying. Oh, I hated it. Even, you know, when she was voicing Beezus, it was bad, but Ramona was far worse. And then there was a whole situation where Ramona had like a party and everything, and then all the kids were getting all annoying and rambunctious and everything, and then just the narrator just hammered in all this nasally talking. It was the worst. So definitely don't do that. But it was definitely interesting to see. Apparently this was written all the way back in 1955. I had no idea about that, so that's what was interesting. So like the first bad thing that Ramona does is she writes all over a library book, and of course that's not right. So her mom's like, okay, Beezus, go ahead and bring Ramona back to the library and pay for the damages. And so Ramona had written on every single page, so the librarian was like, okay, you're gonna have to pay for the whole book. This is going to cost you $2.50. I'm like, that's not bad at all. But I was like, hold on. Let's look all the way to, you know, 1955. Let's see, convert the money. $27 for some stupid little kid's picture book. Are you kidding me? So I was pretty like, oh my gosh. Because, you know, Beezus was like, there's so much more things we could have purchased with that money. And I was like, $2.50? What are you even talking about? And now I was like, oh, I get it. Almost 30 bucks? Yeah, I can understand that. But I do think it did have a good, sweet message at the end. You know, obviously, Beezus was very annoyed by Ramona. You know, all the hijinks were ensuing. And of course, I mean, a 4-year-old kid, you know, it's gonna get pretty annoying to deal with. But it was really sweet because Beezus, you know, her real name is Beatrice, and so she has an Aunt Beatrice, and she had come over, you know, around the end of the book and everything, and her mom and Aunt Beatrice were talking, and they were sharing how they dealt with a similar situation. Aunt Beatrice was kind of like the Ramona to her mom's Beezus, and it was just really sweet where it was like, because of this message and everything, Beezus was like, oh, maybe me and Ramona are gonna laugh about this in the future. And it was just really sweet where it was like, you know, a connection to sisterhood and everything. But again, I feel for me, obviously, like, this felt more decent than me reading Harry Potter. And I know that's totally like, are you serious? I know, I don't quite understand it either, but it was just kind of like, you know, very simplistic, whatever, dealable, but yeah, like, Harry Potter, just, this past reread that I did this year, it just did not work for me at all. The fact that this little kid's book, I can consider a better reading experience than Harry Potter. Oh well, at least I tried. I'm not saying this was a good book. I'm not saying this wasn't enjoyable to me, but it was definitely better than Harry Potter was for my reading experience. And those are all the books I read in August. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please be sure to like this video, comment any books you read this past month or books you're planning on reading in September. And please be sure to subscribe. It would really help and support my channel. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Goodbye!